staying here. We have a special guest speaker from England, and I'm very grateful to him for coming here long distance. His name is Dr. Abdal Hakim Murad, TJ Winter. He is lecturer at the Cambridge University in England, and he has done his studies in Cambridge as well as at Al-Azhar. And he has translated beautiful books of Imam Ghazali. He's editor of Imam Ghazali's text series. There's a very long introduction. He has written a lot of books, and I think a lot of young people who go to internet will see his articles following the four madhabs and the Islamic spirituality, the blind revolution. And we are really honored to have him here speak to us, and his topic will be about, the topic is the supersession and intercession. And I will invite Dr. Abdal Hakim Murad. Please, we welcome him, all of you welcome him to Chicago as a guest, and listen to him very carefully. Dr. Abdal Hakim Murad.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. What I want to talk about is the relevance of our attachment to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in the context of our minority existence in the modern West. In Muslim countries, with only a very small, insignificant, regrettable handful of exceptions, the Milad is a public holiday. Daily newspapers, as we all know, are filled with beautiful devotional poems which celebrate the birth of Sayyidina Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam. There are popular festivities within and outside the mosques, in the streets, which articulate a mass devotion to the blessed founder of our religion, and hence to a public commitment to the Muslim values of the majority. In many Muslim cultures even, it seems sometimes that the Milad is a more committed, colourful affair than the two Eids, and the traditions which have grown up around it, which aim to deepen love for the messenger in the hearts of ordinary believers, are often very spectacular, very rich and very beautiful. Now, what happens when Islam is imported into the traditionally Judeo-Christian societies of the West? Well, frequently this aspect of our beautiful heritage is frequently one of the first things to be neglected. A lot of mosques are adapting a kind of return to the sources type of Islam, which believes that celebrations such as the Milad are unnecessary, or even, in some cases, religiously unacceptable. I don't wish to enter here the very well-rehearsed argument over the Sharia status of Milad celebration. My own experience of study and travel in the Muslim world suggests that the complicated arguments can in fact very easily be bypassed by the observation that scholars and communities which cultivate a spiritual profundity are also those which recognize the legitimacy of Milad commemorations. Individuals and communities which reject Milad tend to live a very dry, uninteresting, superficial kind of Islam, which can never be more than second-rate. To those seeking not merely rigorous authentication from the revelation, but also a genuine devotional life, that Islam of the obsessive preoccupation with form and the neglect or even the denial of what lies beyond the form, the content, is simply not terribly appealing. While there are entirely legitimate Sharia reasons for the celebration of Milad, upheld by the large majority tradition within each of the four Sunni madhabs, we can, I think, therefore go on to propose a further kind of argument. Ask your heart, says a hadith, even if they give you fatwa after fatwa. Hence, when we look at the often very bewildering range of Islamic opinions clamouring for our attention today, we can apply a very simple principle. If a significant number of Sunni ulama are supporting a style of Islam, then its validity for us will depend on one thing, namely its effect on our hearts. To suppose that there's only one valid form of Islamic practice, only one way to pray, only one way to dress, only one way to do business, only one way to calculate one's zakat, and so on, is simply to deny Allah's mercy on this ummah. As the Khalifa Umar bin Abdul Aziz said, the difference of opinion amongst the ulama of this community is a source of rahmah, of divine mercy. All too often nowadays it seems that we simply reject this rahmah in favor of our personal preference for a religion that is, as it were, totalitarian, that brooks no dissent, that regards diversity as a source of weakness rather than of strength. So the ummah is diverse, and rightly so. And in the absence of a Christian-style hierarchy of priests to define and, if necessary, impose a single view on each opinion, this diversity is something that is inevitable. It's going to happen anyway, and it's a natural feature of Islam and of traditional Muslim communities. And given this diversity, we should not attempt to find our own niche by a detailed study of dalils, which, since most of us, including myself, are not ulama and mujtahids, we're unlikely to master adequately. But instead, we should use a quite different criterion, the criterion of the heart, the qalb. Given that there are so many groups and orientations within the wide, generous, broad circle of Islam, we should try to seek out those Muslims who consciously cultivate a life of the heart. That should be what we look for. And we can recognize them quite simply by their generosity, their serenity, by the nur, by the light in their faces. We can also recognize them very often by their tolerance of diversity. A rich inward life immediately reveals itself as the only priority and objective of religion. And once it's established in a Muslim heart, it shows the outward differences between believers in a more objective light. Compared to the true purpose of Islam, which is spiritual upliftment, arguments over the small details of fiqh are of comparatively lesser importance. And this is a vitally important fact, and it's a fact that large sections of the ummah, particularly in our minority experience here in the West, have a tendency to lose sight of. It's not difficult to understand why this should have happened. The outward form, the shell, the husk of religion is easier to transplant into a new diaspora, into new minorities in the West, than is the inward reality. The outward form, the fiqh, the formal belief system, the book Islam, the aqidah, all of this can be studied from texts that we can pack with us in suitcases. All of these things, the book Islam can be packed very easily into the suitcase of the job seeker. But the spiritual life is infinitely more subtle. Often that's what we leave behind us. The spiritual life is tied by, as it were, 1,000 almost invisible filaments to the particularities, to the cultural life of historically rooted Muslim communities. It's linked to our traditional landscape of mosques, of tombs, of family ceremonials and customs, and those are the things that, when we come to the West, we are usually torn away from. Hence, the Muslim, as he or she arrives at a British or American or Australian airport, contemplating a new life on very unfamiliar, alien ground, can sometimes be, as it were, thrown off balance religiously by the very fact of having made hijrah, of having moved. Some newcomers can have an inexorable tendency, and we've all seen them, towards the outward aspects of religion, and often find it hard to locate a context and a language for the reconnection with the spirit. So importing the form of religion is easy when you travel, but importing the content, the spirit of religion, tends to be a lot more difficult. And that's why so many Muslim organizations in the West tend to be a little bit dry, exoteric, harsh, intolerant. The Milad is a very important case in point. The arguments for the Milad, while they have well-known and defensible Sharia foundations, are ultimately intuitive. They're arguments of the heart, not of the mind. Every traditional Muslim harbors in his or her heart a love, mahabba, for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which, given the fitrah of human beings, naturally seeks to express itself in poetry, in song, in the narration of the seerah, and generally in an event which every year expresses the principle that it's an obligation to celebrate blessings, and there is no blessing conferred upon humanity since Adam greater than the coming into the world of the seal of the prophets, Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So in our modern dislocated context, as we grope for a way of being Muslim in a new, unfamiliar world, where issues settled by happy tradition, like the madhabs, like the milad, like so many other familiar parts of the Muslim heritage, are now being opened up once again for scrutiny, for argument and controversy. The despiritualizing of life, which often seems to come with the process of moving from a traditional Muslim culture to a minority experience in the West, has skewed the whole debate and the whole nature of Muslim expression in the West in an outward, dry, exoteric dimension. Arguments amongst Muslim organizations in the West, for the most part, tend to be on the level of form of religion, the level of Islam with a small I, as it were. Sometimes of Iman, almost never does one hear serious discussions of Ihsan. So the religion is unbalanced in favor of the divisive possibilities of its outward forms, because the heart unifies and the law creates not disunity but diversity. There are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of fiqh dalils, each of which can be variously interpreted and provide scope for disagreement. But there is only one heart, and its argument, the dalil, is only ever one. It's the argument that clamours for serenity, for dhikr, for remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the only dalil that the heart has in religion. So once the spiritual life is cultivated, the relative nature of the lesser distinctions and arguments of fiqh become very clear, and the way is open for a tolerance of diversity and unity around the only possible source of unity, namely the life of the heart. And the Sufis have always been aware of this, of the unitive possibilities of the Sufi way. So the famous Spanish Sufi Ibn al-Banna al-Saraqusti says, عباراتنا شتى وحسنك واحد وكل إلى ذاك الجمال يشير. The way we express things is very varied, but your beauty is one, and we are all pointing towards that same beauty. That's the nature of Sufism, because it's pointing towards the one. It is the unitive force within Islam. Now once we've recovered this perspective and got it clear in our minds, it immediately becomes plain what's wrong with many of our Muslim communities here in the West. We've often imported the husk and we've left the kernel behind. And this is why it is the Sufis who are the natural bearers to the West of the message of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And particularly those Sufi tariqas such as the Sada Naqshbandiya, who have such a distinguished and blessed record throughout their history of bringing Islam to communities which previously sat in darkness. And it's the Sufi responsibility precisely because as Sufis we have got our priorities right. The hadith of Jibreel that we all know, one of the most fundamental hadiths of Islam, establishes not just a division between the three categories of Islam, Iman and Ihsan, but it also insists that one stands above the other. One progresses from Islam, from the outward form, to Iman, to Ihsan, from form to mental assent, and then to spiritual realization and experience. And it is in the reverse order of these dimensions that we need to present them.